get into those varsities, and there were big queues of people lining up to enrol and vote on the first day. So if I had to pick, I would say that it would favour Labour or at least the Greens, those special votes. And that's definitely the feeling of Labour as well.
OK, so what happens then this week? Is it pretty much a holding pattern?
It is a holding pattern, and while the parties, as I said, will be starting to get in contact and starting to establish those relationships over the next couple of weeks, things still have to go on in terms of the new parliament. So tomorrow we'll have a big number of new MPs, particularly from Labour, coming to parliament for their induction. Parties like the Greens, their caucus has halved. They've gone from 14 to 7 MPs, so they have to come back and do some pretty hard stuff around party organisation, budgets, all of that sort of thing, effectively cutting everything in half. And also MPs who have lost their seats, and of course the Māori Party, they have to come into Parliament and clear their desks. So the transition, the logistical transition starts this week, but over the top of it will be these negotiations, particularly as National and Labour start to establish the parameters and, as I said, the relationships for how these negotiations are going to play out on both sides. And we could very well see parallel negotiations with Mr Peters talking to both of those parties at the same time.
So at this stage, how would you characterise it? What is this, a caretaker government, a caretaker Prime Minister?
Absolutely. The government is in caretaker mode. So Bill English said there will be a cabinet meeting, as I understand today, but they will not make any significant decisions. So it really just has to be a matter of dealing with things, for example, like the Auckland fuel crisis. So they can't just ignore that. So urgent matters at hand, anything that pops up, but they will not be making any decisions, any new decisions that haven't come from the result of cabinet papers or decisions that were made in the past Parliament.
Thank you very much. That's our political editor, Jane Patterson, speaking to us from the Auckland studio. It's 17 minutes past 7.
So the big question remains, which way will Winston Peters jump? Mr Peters and the New Zealand First Party President Brent Catchpole both declined our requests for interviews this morning. But first, I did speak earlier this morning to the ousted New Zealand First MP, Richard Prosser. He says the decision will be made by one man and one man only, but who he goes with is anyone's guess.
Well, that's the $64,000 question, isn't it?
Yes.
I think if he can make something work on the left with Labour and the support of the Greens, if that can be made possible, he'll do that. And the reason I say that is that to go with National at this stage, the third-term government, looking at a fourth term, looking ahead to 2020, are they likely to get a fifth term? That's not very likely. And what's traditionally happened here and overseas for smaller parties going into coalition with larger parties that are possibly at the end of their lifespan is that they get swallowed up, they get the blame for everything that goes wrong, and they actually get punished more than the larger party.
Okay, so that's analysis, and you know that makes sense in terms of your argument. But is it based on anything that firm that Winston Peters has said, or is that just your own analysis of the situation?
No, that's my gut feeling, and it's not things that he said. It's more because that subject is really it's avoided actually. It's more things he hasn't said, and one of the clues I think is that through the whole campaign he never actually ruled out the Greens, which is something that he's done in the past. So that door is still fractionally ajar, and it's possible that under James Shaw's leadership they've softened a wee bit. He's mellowed a bit with age as well, and it's possible that they may come to some kind of an accommodation that that perhaps gives the Greens some influence in some of the things that they want, but keeps them away from the levers of the economy, which I think is probably where the single biggest difference of policy occurs between the Greens and New Zealand First.
He has said publicly many times, first in 2005, that he believed that there was a constitutional convention to first give the opportunity for the largest party to form government, that talks would happen first with them. Do you think he will be good to his word in that sense?
Well, he's also said that that's not necessarily going to be the case this time, and it's convention is something that has simply been done a number of times. MMP isn't actually really old enough for that to become a constitutional convention as such. But then when you look at, National is the single largest party, but a combination of other parties that are not National are numerically larger, or in terms of the number of votes, not necessarily the number of seats. So it's equally valid to say that there is a moral justification for three other parties who in combination have a have a greater
Sure.
support.
It's whoever first gets over the line, isn't it? Whoever teams up.
That's right.
Now, what would prevent a deal with National, do you think?
Look, it's going to come down to policy concessions and who is prepared to come to the party with more of what's really important to New Zealand First and to New Zealand First supporters as far as getting policy implemented is concerned. That I think will be that'll be the bottom line.
What do you think he wants? Could I start with ministerial positions?
I think those are probably peripheral. I don't know. I have no idea what he may want personally, but there is certainly some extremely good talent in the lineup of New Zealand First MPs who are coming in. People like Fletcher Tabato, extremely capable. Ron Mark, obviously, a lot of experience, and there would certainly be an expectation, I think, that a number of, apart from Winston himself, that a number of New Zealand First MPs would have ministerial roles, probably outside cabinet. I would not imagine that it would be a formal coalition in the sense of going into cabinet, simply because under that arrangement with collective cabinet responsibility, a smaller party with a lesser number of cabinet ministers is pretty much tied to the larger party's policy agenda, and what can happen then is that can't really alter that direction, and when things do go against core policy and things go wrong, it's the smaller party that gets the blame.
Does he decide?
Well, yeah, ultimately at the end of the day, yes. I mean, there's a process that's gone through, and there will be discussion, there will be consultation, but at the very end of the day, it'll be one man's call.
It's his call, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
So this idea that the board and the party and the membership has a genuine say, is that really true?
Oh, there'll be discussion and consultation.
Yeah, but his call.
Yeah, ultimately it's a bit like the old Cold War saying, you have a right to a fair trial before being found guilty and shot. The process will be gone through, and at the end of it, Winston's preference will be what everyone else agrees with.
Yes. We found that a little bit with his policy platform on the campaign, and you fell foul of that a little bit yourself, didn't you? I mean, you see the policy on the website that is the party policy, you talk about it in public, and then you find out it's not the policy anymore.
Yeah, well, and that particular subject was still on the website a week after that. So, I'm not particularly happy about the way that played out, to be perfectly honest.
How do you think he conducted himself during the campaign as leader with his caucus?
I mean, we didn't really see a great deal of him apart from at meetings that we happened to be at in the local area, because he was all over the country in the bus, and we, of course, as candidates and caucus members, were occupied with our own campaigning. Be that.
Yeah, could I ask it? Could I ask it to you this way, Richard? Were you clear what was New Zealand First Party policy or not, or could you not be sure exactly what the policy was because he would contradict it?
Well, I thought I knew what it was. It was what had been agreed by caucus, what had been in the manifesto, and what was on the website. And, I think you could be forgiven for presuming that was in fact policy. But, when things change without notice or warning, it kind of catches you on the hop.
Yeah, so I asked this because it puts us in an interesting position when we go in for coalition negotiations and expectations, because you're an MP in the Parliament in New Zealand First, and you couldn't even be sure what the policy was because it could change at any time, right? So how do we know what he wants and whether the party's policies that were put forward are what's going to be negotiated?
Oh, look, I think when you come to those sorts of negotiations, it's not so much a clean slate as you start with a philosophical approach to certain issues. And because you're talking about a coalition, you're not talking about one party or the other. You're talking about the combination of those things that will form the government. And so those discussions will centre around trying to achieve a consensus. And it may not be precisely what either side would like in exact detail, but it may come to, rather than that, it may come to an arrangement that both sides are reasonably comfortable with and that will achieve the majority of the objectives.
That is the outgoing MP, Richard Prosser, the New Zealand First outgoing MP. So let's turn to the National Party leader, Bill English, who joins me now in the Auckland studio. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Guy.
And congratulations on your result, 46%. You must be pretty thrilled with that.
Well, it was a bit better than we expected. I think better than we did better, and Labor didn't do so well as expected. And I think it's a pretty clear indication that people want to continue with the economic direction, but also a vote for progress. They want to see the issues raised in the campaign taken forward.
Do you think that you have a mandate to govern?
We've yet to secure a mandate to govern. 58, 57 seats in the Parliament's not a majority. You do have to have the numbers. Mr Peters has the seats that would make up the numbers. So that's what a coalition negotiation is about.
Do you think you have a moral mandate?
Well, I think there's a clear indication from the voters about maintaining the direction that National campaigned on, with clearly not sufficient support to be the government. So we respect that. Mr Peters, I think, understands his position pretty clearly, and we now have the task of building on that clear indication from voters to make progress in a coherent, stable government.
Do you think that you will have to wait for special votes to be counted, to be publicised on October 7, I think it is, before you actually get any deal done?
That will depend on the progress of negotiations. I mean, it's hard to see an outcome from the special votes that would be decisive in some different way than is the case.
Well, it might add a seat or two to the left side of the ledger, which would make it more comfortable for Mr Peters, I presume, to do business with them.
I wouldn't want to make assumptions about Mr Peters' position on that or any other matter. I mean, this is why we have a negotiation. But if we bear in mind the nature of the campaign was very strongly focused. In fact, Mr Peters objected to it pretty vigorously, that it was very strongly focused on the two larger parties. And I think the result of that tight competitive campaign was pretty clear-cut, with us 10 percentage points ahead.
What do you think of Mr Peters?
I have known him a long time. I think he's a politician who has specialised in a sense in MMP and understands his role. He has some well understood, long held positions, and we would expect that, given that understanding of how he works and what he believes in, we'd be able to deal with him.
Let's take a few of them. Immigration. Doesn't particularly like lots of it. Will it come down?
These are all matters that we will be discussing with Mr Peters, and I think we need to show him the respect of initiating those discussions with him and his party, rather than taking public positions that won't help.
That's on the table, though, isn't it? Obviously.
Well, we're not going to
You're
be.
Not taking
we're
it
not
off the table.
We're not going to be ruling anything in or anything out, because that amounts to, I think, a lack of focus in the negotiations.
Yeah, but you do roll some things out, don't you? You rule out him sharing the prime ministership.
Well, that's been discussed.
Do you rule that out still?
Well, yes, I certainly do still rule that out.
So we can rule that one off. Super at 67.
Well, we're not going to go into.
You're not
going
to go into any of
that? No, we're not. Because look, this is a process where we and I think the public understand this, and it's reflected in the vote. We respect the role of a smaller party in a negotiation. They have an opportunity for influence. And we would negotiate how they're going to achieve that influence.
Yeah. We've got proportional representation, right? So should New Zealand First have a proportional role in the government of 7.5% or whatever the numbers are?
Well, the numbers influence the negotiations. National is in a stronger position with 46% of the vote. Mr Peters has got 7 or 8%. He's got the marginal numbers. That's what matters the most. But I would expect the negotiation to be weighted according to the public will. I mean, that's why we have an election, to assess it. Now, if we had 40% of the vote or 36% of the vote, then it would be quite different.
But as you say, he's got the critical cards. Now, last time you did business with him was 96, and he had twice the support, didn't he? He had 13%, 17 MPs from memory. He's got about half that this time, but he's still got the crucial cards. You can't get there without him. You're going to have to give him everything he wants, aren't you?
That's why you have a negotiation. I think as I said, the indication from the electorate is, for instance, I don't think the electorate would want to see the economic progress of New Zealand significantly compromised.
Does that mean he doesn't get a finance role?
Nor do I think Mr Peters would want to do that.
Does that mean he doesn't get a finance role?
That doesn't have any particular meaning other than the indications that came from the election result. Mm-hmm.
What about, and look, fair enough, you're not going to do the negotiations in terms of ruling policies in and out, but how might the negotiations be conducted? I mean, who will do them for you?
Well, I'd expect to be involved to some extent, but there's depending on the level of detail, there's plenty of capability around among both parties to get into the detail of policy.
Have you decided who your negotiating team is?
Well, we've got a cabinet meeting today, so there'll be some discussion about that there.
Is that a cabinet matter?
Well, ministers, senior. Okay, let's use the terminology. I mean, we're firmly in caretaker mode, so there's clear distinctions between the coalition process and the cabinet process,
that's why I asked.
And senior MPs will have that discussion.
Lawyers. Seriously, because
that's all a matter for.
Is it going to be lawyers at dawn?
Well, that's all a matter for how the parties wish to conduct it. I mean, that's
would you need a lawyer?
When we had discussions in 2008 with the ACT Party, they essentially had a legal document. Look, Mr. Peters is experienced in this. He's done it more than anyone else, and will have, in my view, is likely to have some pretty clear views about how it will work.
Do you expect an old school, nailed down, 30-page document like we had in 96? Or do you expect the more modern, looser arrangement? Is that the way things have headed? Do you have an opinion or assessment on that?
The nature of the agreements has evolved, and it's turned out, when you look at them, that pretty much every MMP agreement has unique features, and I would expect that this will have some unique features reflecting the circumstances, because the circumstances are always different. There has been, as you pointed out, a tendency to have a more generalised document, but that will be a matter for discussion with New Zealand First. I'd imagine that with respect to long-held positions, Mr. Peters would like to be fairly particular. There may be other things where he's not quite so concerned, or we're not quite so concerned.
Have you talked to him yet?
No, I haven't talked to him yet.
Why not?
I just think that...
You've talked to Jacinda Ardern.
Well, that was just on election night.
Yeah.
It's been an intensive campaign. Big day on Saturday. Mr. Peters indicated he wasn't in a rush. I didn't see the need to break into what I hope would have been a more restful day for all political leaders yesterday.
When was the last time you spoke to him? I'm just trying to get a sense of do you have a relationship with him?
I've known Mr. Peters since 1990.
Yeah, so but in a good way?
Well, and it's been a relationship that's been tested in a lot of different ways, sometimes with some real tension and combative politics, other times, quite sociable and relaxed. But he's someone who understands his role. Like he's not someone who's not some new party that's just entered into Parliament that doesn't know what it's doing.
You seconded the motion to boot him out of caucus, didn't you?
Yes, I was involved in that, yes.
That was, 91?
That's right.
Goes back a way, eh? Bit of bad blood there?
Well, look, I've always respected his particular role in New Zealand politics. I think he understands his role.
What is his role?
Well, it's always been a bit of a maverick role. His brand has been strong for a long time. People have understood what it means.
Yeah, so in your words, a maverick is going to be deciding who governs New Zealand.
No, in my words,
you just called him a maverick.
Well, that's always been a bit of his brand, hasn't it? And the point here simply is, Mr. Peters is in many respects a known quantity, but of course, in this particular election, he's got a particular role. Maybe not the one he expected.
Isn't a maverick the opposite?
Well, look, I'm not here to analyse the psychology of all politicians.
You're doing all right.
It's all I'm saying is Mr. Peters is in many respects a known quantity, but one of the features of his political career is understanding his role, and he's very experienced, and I don't think that there's any particular difficulty in framing up a negotiation where we would expect him to raise particular issues, and he would expect us to raise particular issues.
Do you think you know what he wants?
I think there's some of the things that anyone would know what he wants.
What are they?
Well, just some of his long-held positions I think he would expect to be reflected in government policy.
Do you think you expect to be the Deputy PM?
That's a matter for discussion with him.
You'd be happy with that though, wouldn't you?
Well, it's a matter for discussion with him.
So, but PM's off the table, but Deputy PM ain't.
Well, as I said, it's a matter for discussion, and we want to have a respectful, constructive negotiation, which I know is going to be tense. And I think we've learned from recent
why
years
will it be tense?
Because what works is an environment of respect, which is not necessarily about agreement, because coalition partners always have the opportunity to disagree, and often do. Whatever's in the agreement, there's still issues that arise, new things that come up that have to be dealt with, and I think getting an atmosphere, getting a focus on the respective roles that are understood and respected is the key to getting the disagreements settled.
When do you think we'll know?
Well, when the negotiations are complete, but I think Mr Peters has indicated quite a reasonable timetable, and I think the sort of daily pursuit of it isn't going to yield results any sooner than the negotiation actually can.
Is that a warning to us?
Well, look, everyone wants some indications of progress, and but 2 to 3 weeks is a reasonable period, I think, and we will get the opportunity to. We have to spend time on this, out of the light of the media.
What are your chances of getting a deal done?
I think the chances are pretty good, but that's to be tested in negotiations.
Thanks very much for your time. Really do appreciate it. That is, what do you call yourself at the moment? A caretaker Prime Minister?
Yes, that's caretaker.
Off to mow the lawns?
Well, this will be a bit of paperwork and things, but off to find the common ground with New Zealand First.
Good luck. That's Bill English. He's the leader of the National Party, caretaker Prime Minister, and one of the negotiators with the New Zealand First leader.